But the EB-1A is more obtainable than one may think, especially with kind of diligent, concerted, and targeted efforts to meet the criteria.
Hi everyone, I'm Priya from It's OKR and welcome back to our channel. If you're new today, It's OKR is a content platform for South Asian immigrants and we aim to educate, entertain, and empower them. Today's topic is green card through EB-1 category. We have received a lot of questions about it and I'm sure you're as excited as we are to cover this topic. But before we begin, today we have with us a nationally ranked immigration lawyer, Sameer Khedekar, who's going to help us uncover and unpack this topic. Sameer has his own law firm, Banyan Law Firm, and he has also started something called Immigration Office Hours. What Immigration Office Hours does is it connects people like us to immigration lawyers who are in need for consultancies or advices or anything that's going on. Sameer, I will pass it back to you in case I missed something about your background or anything else you'd like to add.
No, I think you got it. That was pretty impressive, actually. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Sameer, just before we begin, tell us a little bit about yourself. How long have you been doing this, your corporate experience? There is a reason I know you started Immigration Office Hours. Tell us a little bit about it, and then we'll deep dive into the topic straight away.
Sure. Yeah. So I've been an immigration lawyer for almost 20 years. It doesn't seem like that, but then I look at myself and see all the gray hair and it all comes together. So yeah, it's been a while now. Prior to starting my firm in 2018, I practiced as a corporate immigration lawyer for a large West Coast business immigration law firm. I was a managing partner of that firm, and our clients were, large Fortune 500 companies, and I did that for 15, 16 years. And so I really enjoyed that. I really love immigration law. But what I did realize working on the company side, first of all, everybody who was involved, the lawyers at our firm, the HR, everybody there was super into and invested into helping the employees, right? But there's like a systemic issue with corporate immigration, such that a lot of the attention of the law firm and the HRs towards the business more so than it is to the employee. There's a huge need that I noticed for the employees who didn't really kind of understand what was happening immigration-wise, and it caused what I saw then, like a great deal of anxiety and stress for them. And I realized that I was really kind of super interested in helping kind of figure out ways to help that almost a lot more than I wanted to kind of work with the companies, even though I loved working with them as well. So that was like a major impetus for me in starting my own firm and kind of trying to figure out kind of new ways to help employees of companies that have law firms. How do I help the employees understand kind of more where they stand at any given point in time?
That is amazing and also very core to our own mission, where we want to make sure that we make as many resources available for immigrants, because this is a whole complicated system. And once it goes to the company, or once your extension is filed, or you're going through green card, you have little to no visibility around what's happening. And sometimes it's confusing. And especially with crazy EB-2, EB-3 wait times for Indians, like any alternate option is a great option to at least like try and explore. So appreciate that. We will dive into the topic straight away. Again, for everyone here, the topic for today is green card on EB-1 category. We will be covering multiple categories, what that means. We will also be covering whether you can apply for EB-1 or if you are eligible for EB-1 by being on H1B. So continue watching. And if you haven't subscribed to our channel, please subscribe to it and hit that bell icon before we proceed. Thank you so much. And Sameer, would just love to understand the first question. Tell us what is EB-1 category and the three categories under EB-1, EB-1A, EB-1B, and EB-1C.
Sure. And to zoom back even a little bit further, just to provide kind of the proper context. So immigration is based on sponsorship for the most part. I mean, there are, refugees and asylees, that's a separate different story. But in most cases, one comes to the US based on employment sponsorship or family-based sponsorship, right? So family-based is FB, employment-based is EB, hence the EB. And it refers to green cards, right? Of course, there are plenty of visas that one can come on a temporary basis.
Right.
All these rules were written back like in the 60s and 70s before we even had an internet, 80s, maybe early 90s, in an economy that, maybe it made sense back then to have people come on visas and then go back to their country and then have the green card process be completely different and more permanent. Of course, nowadays it makes no sense and it's caused huge problems, right? In terms of logistically, a company wants to bring somebody on, just hire them permanently, but then they have to go through the charade of a visa, then get a green card. It's about a future job employment offer and all these different complications that don't make any sense. So EB refers to the green card process specifically. So we're not going to talk about visas at all right now.
Okay.
Right. And so there are quotas, right, every year for green cards. And so family-based, employment-based, each have their quotas. And so EB refers to, if you ever look at the visa vault, it refers to how they allocate the quotas. Okay, so they do it in tiers, right? So the first preference for the government is EB-1, like they prefer them the most, basically, is what they're trying to say. And EB-1s, there are 3 subtypes. There are those that have what's called extraordinary ability. Right. There are outstanding researchers or professors and multinational managers. So EB-1A, EB-1B, EB-1C. And those are the 3 different ways that one may get EB-1. Why is EB-1 so important for Indian nationals? The reason is because the other aspect of the quota is that it's divided by country of birth, right? So they only allow a certain number of numbers to go to each location a person is born in, right? And so obviously the most applicants are who are born in India. And so they have consequently the longest lines. And so EB-1 has, a quicker way to get a green card because the lines are shorter for Indians mostly, right? Indian born. Remember, this is about being where you're born, not where you're a citizen of, right? So in terms of which quota you fall into. So those are generally, is that general enough for you, or do you want me to get more into specific?
Yeah, like general enough. No, thank you for providing that background generally from a green card standpoint and what it means and what are the 3 categories. It will be super helpful if you can summarize like EB-1A is for this and EB-1B for this and EB-1C I know is for like multinational managers. And then just a little bit about what the qualifying criteria for each looks like.
Sure. Let me start with B and C because those are the 2. Sorry, I'm just going not alphabetically here, but those are the 2 that require employer sponsorship, right? Okay. So employer has to petition for you, and so they have to pay for it. They have to agree to it. There's all these kind of like conditions that come with that, right? So to be an outstanding researcher, you generally have to. There's several criteria you have to meet, at least 2 of them. What people don't realize is that they also have to be working for a company that has at least 3 full-time researchers and has made advances from a research perspective. Then the criteria are kind of like you have to, either have a PhD, you have publications, you have, all these different things that researchers would have. That's what you get judged on. So generally, this category is for universities are very common petitioners, right? Because they have lots of researchers there. Or just, any company that engages in a fair amount of research and development would have EB-1Bs. I know like companies like Facebook, they do EB-1Bs too. There is a fair amount of research and development happening in big tech. But as a policy, what companies like that tend to do is that they restrict it only to PhDs, right? And so it's a way to get an EB-1, but it's not something you can just kind of do on your own.
Super helpful. I work for Google and I definitely know they have an EB-1B category and it is for PhD only. Yeah. So just help me understand. Example, if I have my PhD degree and I am working with an organization which has this research oriented role, or I'm directly working with a university, does that mean I'm eligible for EB-1B?
You are. I mean, you have to meet the other the criteria, right? And that's a very much of a kind of a individual kind of a analysis, right? Everybody has a different background, so there isn't. But yeah, I mean, you have to think about it like this: if you want EB-1B, you have to meet the company's criteria, and then also the legal criteria. And people sometimes combine the two, understandably. But what the company requires can be more strict than what the government requires, right? The company policy is based on what they deem to be the most cost effective for the company. So you don't have to necessarily have a PhD, technically, although it would substantially increase your chances. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Super helpful. Okay, let's talk about EB-1C.
Yeah. So the other EB-1 where you need employer sponsorship. So in a vacuum, you must have been working for the company, the sponsor company abroad, so out of the US, for at least 1 year in the prior 3 years, in an executive or managerial capacity. Okay. Then after you come to the US, you must be working for a related entity of that company. So parent, subsidiary, affiliate, branch, whatever it is. Also as an executive or a manager. And if that's the case, if both are the case, then you could qualify for the EB-1C. Okay. There are now many more kind of like little distinctions and quirks to this category. Most people that could do the EB-1C have already come here on the L1A visa, right? And so they were managers. Now, in order to get an L1A, you don't have to have been a manager abroad. It helps, but you don't have to have been one. Okay. But for the EB-1C, you do. So by the time they get here as an L1A, which is like the visa equivalent of that, they've already worked abroad, right? So if they weren't managers abroad, they're not going to get the EB-1C, even though they had the L1A. So that's the kind of slightly frustrating kind of distinction or quirk that happens in this scenario.
Okay, can you repeat that actually? Like, are you saying that if they did not work outside, then they are not eligible for EB-1C? Is that correct?
So anyone on an L1 visa has worked for
outside,
a company abroad, right? But not necessarily as a manager. Right, right. Because it's not required for the L1A visa. Now it's possible they did, but it's not something they had to show to get the L1A. Or maybe they didn't have it, right? But you can still qualify for the L1A as long as you're coming into the US to work in a managerial capacity or executive capacity.
Got it.
So that makes sense? Yeah.
Yes, totally makes sense. I came on L1A actually, so I was trying to understand, because the one question that we always get is, if I did not work for the same company outside, or if I did not work in that managerial capacity, can I still be eligible for EB-1C? And from what I am learning from you, that is not the case, right?
That's not the case. Now, one thing that I've seen some people do, it's very difficult to pull off, but I've had a couple of very enterprising clients back in my corporate law days. They pull it off. So they worked for the company here. Let's say they were an H1B and they're Indian, and it was taking forever, right, to get a green card. They figured out, like, multinational companies they're working for, right? They figured out a way to get a job, let's say in Canada or the UK or whatever it is. That was all simultaneously good for their career advancement to take. And they worked there on assignment for a year or two, right? They made sure the job was managerial, and then they came back. And they were able to ensure they had a job to come back to. So those are two. This is not for everybody. It's not always easy to pull this off, but it has happened. And so that's how people have been able to manufacture the EB-1C.
That's amazing. No, thank you for sharing. Super helpful. Anything more about EB-1C that we need to talk about before we move to EB-1A?
I don't think so. They're hard. EB-1Cs are super hard. L1As are super hard unless you work for a giant company and have a blanket. Even then, they can be hard. Yeah, you'll have company counsel help you with that. And it's always good to have several people that you've managed, 5 or 10, at least 10 maybe, just to make a stronger case. But maybe that's getting a little too specific. But yeah, I think just be careful. It can be a pretty hard category
Got it. Okay. So EB-1C is a difficult category, and unless you have managerial experience with the same company,
Yeah,
or you can figure that out, it's a
yeah,
difficult one to pursue. Got it.
yeah,
Let's talk about EB-1A a little bit. I feel people don't talk about it a lot, and they don't know
yeah.
much about it. So would love to learn and understand.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And I think it's completely underrated in terms of, if not its immediate benefit to foreign national here, but to maybe the prospective potential benefit to you, right?
Mhm.
Think about what the alternative is. Like, do I get myself qualified for an EB-1A? It sounds like it's too hard. Or do I wait in the 80 to 100 year EB-2 backlog, right? There really isn't much of a, many people are stuck too, so I understand that and respect that. But the EB-1A is more obtainable than one may think, especially with kind of diligent, concerted, and targeted efforts to meet the criteria. It's the only one where you can sponsor yourself, right?
Okay.
So that's huge. You don't need a company
Oh,
to sponsor you. Okay.
so it's
Um,
self-sponsored. Okay.
yeah, self-sponsored. The other one you can sponsor yourself for is called the National Interest Waiver, that NIW. It's EB-2. That doesn't help Indian-born people,
Yeah.
but it does help nationals of other countries. And it's a little bit easier than EB-1. So I would also look at that. We don't want to talk about that today, but
Okay.
that's just another option. Okay.
Okay. So
Okay.
for EB-1A, it's self-sponsored, and what are the other criterias that someone
Yeah.
needs to be eligible for?
Well, before we even get into criteria, let me just quickly give you context. It's a bit of a crazy
Yeah.
time for EB-1s. The denial is close to 50% of all
Oh.
cases, which has skyrocketed over the years.
Hmm.
I think it's because more people are applying. And so they just think more people are trying to take advantage of the rules. My view is that, especially with the case of Indian-borns, you know that more people have been here for longer and that they're just building their profile and getting better at their job. And now they're becoming eligible. And so you have more applicants. That's resulted in more denials. Now, the rules haven't changed that much for almost 10 years, right? But why the denial rates increased? Well, it's because the denials are largely illegal. Okay. And so they're making illegal interpretations of the rule to try to control the amount of approvals they have to issue out. Okay, that's been our experience. So what has that resulted in? That's resulted in a lot of RFEs, denials, but litigation. So we have several cases, lots of law firms have several cases pending in federal court challenging EB-1 denials. That, at least in our case, what we see, when you file a lawsuit, the government almost never wants to defend them. So they just basically settle. They reopen the case, issue an RFE, and then eventually approve it. Because the government at that point, they realized that whatever that one officer did probably was illegal. So that's kind of the weird kind of sub kind of context of what's happening here with EB-1s right
Got
now.
it. Got it.
So that being said, it's kind of like the L1 visa. You have to qualify for at least 3 criteria of between
Mhm.
8 and 10, depending on whether you're applying in businesses, engineering, sciences, or arts, right?
Okay.
And so the criteria range from, I mean, they're all over the internet. I'm sure you can kind of Google it, but they range from things like, playing a leading role for your very distinguished employer or
Okay.
organization, making unique contributions that are, of major significance to your field, so beyond your company, right? Having been published, like you published articles, you've published papers and journals, that maybe if you're not a researcher, it doesn't have to be heavily cited, right? That's like
Okay.
the misnomer is like, I don't only
Hmm.
have like 200 sites or whatever it is. But if you're an engineer, like that's pretty good, right? So
Got it.
it's really all dependent on kind of what you're doing, right?
Interesting.
Um, have you been mentioned in the media, major media? Have you won significant awards? Have you judged the work of others, either by yourself or kind of in a group on a panel, right? In my opinion, that category is probably the lowest hanging fruit of them all. Almost everybody I talked to a T, especially engineers, have passed on opportunities to judge like hackathons or kind of startup
Yeah.
competitions or things like that, because it was just too much time and they just didn't see the value in it for them. But if they had realized that actually, if I got 2 or 3 under my belt, I would qualify for an EB-1 category, they would have done it in a heartbeat. So there's a lot of regret this. So I'm trying to get the word out. Like, you get these opportunities, go for it. Like, start judging these things, right? Because you can always keep it in your back pocket in case you ever want to apply for the EB-1. What also works for judging is just doing review. So reviewing, doing peer review, of other people's articles or papers. That also qualifies. Making more money than most people in your field, whether that's just salary, but it can also be in stock options. It can be in funding if you started a company. There's several different ways to show. It's not limited just to salary. So there are different ways to show that. So these are examples. You have to get at least 3 of these things, okay? The hard part is that there's a second step where then the government will say, okay, well, maybe you met 3. But we're going to take a step back and do what's called the final merits determination. And we get to, thanks to a case that we all hate now, happened about 10 years ago, we get to subjectively assess whether or not you look like somebody who's extraordinary and is going to prospectively benefit the US, right? So then they get to like kind of inject their subjectivity into the process, right? That's where they have a little bit of discretion, kind of leeway. And that's one of the reasons why the denial rates are going so high. So yeah, people, for example, who have met 3 of the criteria who are getting denied because of that reason. So that's why, number one, we can debate the legality of that. Unfortunately, it's going to be tough because even the courts have said they could do that. Or you can try to go for 4 or 5 of the categories. Because if you do that, then it becomes increasingly more difficult for the government to say with a straight face that you don't meet the bottom merits determination. So we try to get most of our clients to get that many.
Awesome.
So,
okay.
Yeah.
No, super helpful. And because you mentioned O1, I'm just curious, what is the difference between O1 and EB-1A? Because I do know, like, I do have a friend who's an artist, and she is the one who would kind of go for an O1 visa. Can it be used interchangeably, or what are the differences or things to keep in mind?
Yeah, the O1 is the visa, right? Temporary visa. EB-1A is the green card. That's the major difference. Yeah, and with the O1, okay, there's 2 kinds of O1s. There's the O1A and an O1B. O1A are for like scientists, engineers, business, right? The criteria look very similar to the EB-1 for the O1. But the O1B is for artists, right? And actors and actresses and stuff. The criteria looks very different naturally than the EB-1 and is probably easier to meet. So one can get an O1B as an artist, but then kind of find that they have a much harder time getting the EB-1 because number one, the criteria is a little different, and number 2, the standards are higher because it's for a more permanent benefit.
Totally makes sense, because that's a visa. So if you've come on a particular visa type, then that just gives you like that eligibility option, and completely depends on that. So no, super helpful in that. I have like one question that we constantly keep getting is, can someone on H1B ever be eligible for an EB-1A or an EB-1C?
Well, I mean, for sure. And there's nothing in the regulations that says you have to have an O1 visa to apply out of. An EB-1 can be applied from any visa. We've done student visas, F1, H1B, O1, L1, even. You don't even have to be in the country. I'm doing EB-1s for very talented people who are in Canada, in India, in Europe right now. I mean, the whole point is, you're petitioning for your green card to come to the US permanently. So it doesn't matter what your current stage. And that being said, I would say if you have an O1, it's probably subconsciously a little helpful, maybe a little persuasive. It might help the overall package because then it makes the government think, okay, you've already kind of been vetted for that. So maybe, we'll look at you a little bit. Yeah. And maybe they don't give that benefit of the doubt to an H1B holder. But this is all individual, anecdotal. But we've done several EB-1s for H1B holders.
Okay, so like example, I'm an H1B visa holder who's already in waiting for their EB-1, EB-2 or EB-3. Can I still pursue an EB-1A if I have like multiple patterns, if I've built an app, if I've done like participated in a hackathon, like if I have all of that in my belt, would you recommend that it's at least worth pursuing an EB-1A, even though they have EB-2 or EB-3?
Oh yeah, 100%. In fact, many EB-1s that we're doing right now are for people who are pending and kind of just waiting in those long, long lines for the EB-2 and EB-3. So look at your criteria. If you feel like you have a shot, if you're meeting criteria, right? That's what it's important. It doesn't matter what your visa status is. It doesn't matter if you have the company's petition pending. You can have them both happening at the same time. So absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, super helpful. And I know like last couple of things before we wrap up, and you touched upon this a little bit where you were like, one should take up these opportunities to build their profile when given a chance. What advice would you have for people who are looking to build their profile for EB-1? And especially if they have like, give me two, like one for people who are in tech backgrounds and one for people who are in a little bit of non-tech backgrounds, if possible.
Yeah. Well, tech and then research, maybe academia, or then maybe like business, like if you're like an entrepreneur. Those are like the three most common. Like I said, the low-hanging fruit is judging. Like if you can somehow get invited, so network, right? Get to know people, be around people who are giving you opportunities to boost your profile in a way that simultaneously boosts your prospects personally and professionally, right? I think the two are not inconsistent with each other, right? If you can write as much as possible, publish, whether it's in a business journal or in academia or elsewhere. I mean, more than a blog, like blogs are not necessarily taken as seriously, as some of these more established locations. If you can somehow, if you have contacts in the press, if you can kind of get help getting yourself, and let's say if you're starting a company, media really helps, the TechCrunch articles, those kinds of things. Certainly look at that. But other than that, and also I think if you were able to enter yourself into contests for awards, I think people, what I found they have a hard time, thinking of themselves as somebody who's worthy, like the imposter syndrome issue, right? Like, I'm not good enough for that, but you have to, like, the EB-1's a marketing piece, and you have to be your #1 advocate, right? So you need to go and enter yourself into awards, nominations, those kinds of things. That you never know. You might get picked, and if you are, you never know. It could help you for the EB-1. So put yourself into situations that'll help you get recognized in different ways.
Perfect. I think that is such a good way to wrap up, which is all about like build your own story and be the hero of your story and keep building that profile. Thank you so much for your time, Sameer. This was super helpful. It will be great if you can tell people how to reach out to you in case, what's the best way to reach out to you in case there are questions, or if they want to consult, or if they want to join immigration office hours. We want to make sure that they have access to you or the resources you provide.
Yeah, just go to immigrationofficehours.com and there's information there on how to get in touch with us and schedule consultations.
Awesome. And we will link all of that in the description box so that everyone has information. But thank you once again for joining. Hopefully this is like the first one of many conversations that we have, and hopefully we can have you live soon and answer some questions from our viewers and followers. Thank you, Sameer, once again. And curious, I just realized I never asked you, where are you based?
Oh, I'm in the Bay Area, so
you're in the
just
Bay
south
Area.
of San Francisco. Yeah.
Okay, awesome. Great speaking with you on a Friday. Thank you once again, and thank you everyone for watching. Bye, Sameer.
Thank you so much for having me. Bye-bye.
Bye.